e ela pode ser diferente. A JBS, uma das maiores produtoras de alimentos do mundo, apresentou um compromisso global, JBS Net Zero. Até 2040, ano após ano, ela vai melhorar ainda mais o jeito que produz, com 100% de energia limpa e mais eficiência. Hoje, a JBS já exige desmatamento ilegal zero e monitora todos os seus fornecedores. Até quem vende para eles começou a ser monitorado também. E vai ter muito investimento em ciência para criar novas tecnologias. Não vai ser fácil, mas será feito. Para tudo isso sair do papel. JBS Net Zero 2040. Alimentar a mudança é o nosso compromisso.
Pensando bem, se a gente ficar esperando esse tal de futuro, muito provavelmente ele vai chegar do jeito que não queremos, que não escolhemos. Nós somos os donos do futuro. Você, do seu. Ela, do dela. E nós, do de todos nós. O que transforma a vida da gente não é o destino, é o caminho, construído passo a passo, projeto por projeto. Por isso, somos uma empresa que faz e que aprende fazendo. Para que milhares de pessoas encontrem outros e novos caminhos. O futuro é esse vasto terreno fértil com infinitas possibilidades. Comprar o primeiro imóvel, um terreno, apartamento do seu jeito, alugar ou investir em algo fora do país. A MRV & Co oferece infinitas soluções de moradia para todos os sonhos e necessidades. Assim como é possível construir uma casa, é possível construir o mundo em que queremos viver. E quanto mais vidas impactadas, mais rápido chegaremos lá. E quando esse número for tão grande que se torne impossível parar de transformar, teremos o futuro que queremos. Afinal, o melhor jeito de prever o futuro é construir o futuro. MRV & Co. Que futuro você vai construir agora?
Boa tarde, senhoras e senhores, boa tarde a
Good
todos.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Sejam todos muito bem-vindos a mais um evento dessa série realizada pelo Valor Econômico, em parceria com a Coalizão Brasil, Clima, Florestas e Agricultura. Essa série que tem o patrocínio master da JBS Net Zero 2040. O encontro de hoje conta também com Nescafé e MRV como patrocinadores. É a terceira live da especial Coalizão Brasil para a COP26. É um projeto idealizado para ajudar o Brasil a se preparar para a Convenção Mundial do Clima, que vai ser em novembro em Glasgow. Então, ao todo, nós estamos fazendo 6 lives, tá? São 6 lives, uma por mês, transmitidas aqui nas redes sociais do Valor Econômico. Cada uma dessas lives discute um tema específico, né, sobre a importância de tudo isso que a gente está conversando. E o tema de hoje, talvez, na minha opinião, um dos mais importantes, sem dúvida, é o setor privado brasileiro na ação climática. Quer dizer, tão importante quanto a gente saber como o governo está se preparando para esse encontro, que vai ser muito importante, é sabermos também como as empresas estão se preparando para isso, do ponto de vista de engajamento e para aproveitar as oportunidades também que podem ser criadas por todas essas exigências que a gente tem aí pela frente, tá certo? Meu nome, então, é Fernando Lopes, eu sou editor de agronegócios do Valor e eu tenho o prazer imenso de dividir a mediação do evento de hoje com o Marcelo Brito. Marcelo Brito é presidente da ABAG, da Associação Brasileira do Agronegócio, tem mais de 30 anos aí de experiência nessa área de ESG, né, Marcelo? E aí hoje a gente conta, então, com a participação do Marcelo aqui, que é, inclusive, co-facilitador da Coalizão Brasil, Clima, Florestas e Agricultura. Boa tarde, Marcelo.
Boa tarde, Fernando. Boa tarde a todos. Prazer dividir essa mesa aqui com tanta gente top, nobre, no setor privado brasileiro. Mais uma vez, os parabéns à Coalizão Brasil, Clima, Floresta e Agricultura e ao Valor Econômico por essa parceria. Por aqui nós procuramos fazer o que é mais caro para a coalizão, que é o diálogo. Colocar ideias divergentes em busca de uma convergência, discutir visões de mundo e, principalmente, trazer essas visões modernas para o nosso país, para a construção de um modelo que a gente gostaria de ver no país em todo. Então, muito bom estar aqui com vocês. Teremos uma hora e meia muito rica. Devolvo para você, Fernando. Vamos lá.
Maravilha, porque hoje o time está forte, né, o Marcelo? A gente tem conosco, então, para debater esses temas, o Caio Carvalho. O Caio Carvalho é engenheiro agrônomo, muito conhecido no setor de agronegócio, ex-presidente da ABAG, né, Caio? O Caio, então, ele hoje em dia, ele dirige a Canaplan, né, que é uma empresa privada que atua em consultoria e projetos para o setor sucocoleiro, continua como diretor da ABAG e vai estar aqui conosco no debate hoje. Além do Caio, nós temos Carolina da Costa, PhD, com mais de 20 anos de experiência em gestão, aí, baseada em modelos de inovação e de governança. Ela é partner da Mauá Capital para novos negócios e soluções financeiras sustentáveis e modelos blended finance. Então, a Carolina vai poder colaborar muito com esse debate também. O Cristiano Teixeira, também com mais de 30 anos de experiência aí profissional, né? O Cristiano hoje é CEO da Klabin, uma das empresas mais importantes do Brasil aí na área de papel e celulose. O Cristiano é embaixador pelo clima da Rede Brasil do Pacto Global da ONU, faz parte do grupo Business Leaders da COP26, com o Cristiano também conosco aqui. E para completar esse time muito forte que a gente está também com um engenheiro mecânico aqui, pós-graduado em gestão, também com mais de 30 anos de experiência, o Gilberto Tomazoni. Tomazoni é CEO global da JBS. A JBS é a maior empresa de proteínas animais do mundo, tá certo? E aí a JBS, até como patrocinador, para zerar as emissões aí até 2040, né? Como eu falei logo no início ali do patrocínio, é isso, eles estabeleceram essa meta recentemente, que é uma meta muito importante. Então, nós vamos dar início aos nossos debates. Passo a bola para você de novo, Marcelo. Boa tarde a todos, uma ótima tarde de trabalho para nós.
Obrigado, Fernando. E eu quero começar com o nosso amigo Cristiano Teixeira. Cristiano, mais uma vez, muito obrigado por aceitar nosso convite, participar disso aqui. Gente, para quem não sabe, o Cristiano, além dessa posição dele na Klabin, uma das mais importantes empresas de papel e celulose do mundo, também é o único empresário da América do Sul a fazer parte de um grupo conhecido como Business Leaders, que são líderes de negócios mundiais que formam um pequeno grupo em volta do Alok Sharma, que é o champion para a próxima COP. Ou seja, ele está diretamente ligado à organização da COP de Glasgow. Então, Cristiano, parabéns por essa posição, tá? Não é qualquer um que tem essa oportunidade. Então, eu queria começar te perguntando o seguinte, até para a gente ter uma indicação da nossa conversa seguinte, nos fala um pouco o seguinte, o que, do seu ponto de vista privado, o que a gente pode esperar da COP? Sobre o ponto de vista dos organizadores, no qual você está ligado, o que eles esperam também dessa COP, ou seja, pelo lado governamental e pelo lado privado, o que é a COP de Glasgow, o que é essa agenda climática e o que a gente pode esperar desse evento em novembro próximo. Seja bem-vindo. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, Marcelo. Obrigado, Fernando. Uma honra participar desse bate-papo com vocês. Bom, antes de mais nada, acho que essa história ela remonta lá desde 92, né? A Eco 92, ou a Rio 92, ou a Convenção da Terra, que a gente conheceu. O Brasil estava à frente do tema, logo após a redemocratização do Brasil. O Brasil era já visto como protagonista global nos assuntos de ecologia, meio ambiente, hoje sustentabilidade ou ESG, né? Então, essa história é uma história bonita que a nação brasileira vem contando. Isso, nós tivemos o privilégio, naquela época, do embaixador que estava à frente, à época, o doutor Celso Laffer, também é acionista e conselheiro aqui da Klabin. Então, a gente consegue contar essa história, inclusive, fazendo alguma ligação pessoal aí, tanto do doutor Celso, na época, embaixador brasileiro, com a própria história da Klabin, né? E o fato de eu estar lá, nada mais, hoje, representando o Brasil e a América do Sul nesse grupo, nada mais é do que a materialização de décadas, por não falar um século de sobrevivência da Klabin, muito rigorosa, muito persistente nos temas de sustentabilidade.
Sustainability. Well, since 1992 and the confirmation of the parts happened after that in 1994. In 1995 was the first parties conference. So over the last nearly 30 years, it's been 26 meetings. We're going to holds the 26 now, and what we expect from the meeting, both from governments and private leaders that are going to be represented by us and by other people. From the governments, we expect an evolution, a development of the agreement that has been drafted and started negotiating on the carbon market. This is a great desire of the Brazilian nation, so that we actually pursue the formation of a carbon zero government. But business leaders expect engagement of private sector, so that we actually up until the COP, as many companies as possible have adhered to the reduction of carbon emission, decarbonization, which is so desired by all of us, and obviously based on science. So if you would imagine, many people are talking about decarbonization, reducing their own emissions, but more importantly, this has to be regulated or based in science as we know it. So our role at COP, the business leaders at COP, we want to engage as many companies as possible to adhere to the carbon reduction goals. Thank you, Cristiano. And well, let's take the opportunity here of decarbonization. I'm gonna pass the baton to you, Caio. You have a very long history. Well, one of the most important sectors of Brazilian agribusiness, which is the sugarcane sector. From a simple sugar producer a long time ago, today you are in energy sector power, and this has a heavy weight in the Brazilian emission balance. So, in your opinion, within this decarbonization movement, how is this sector, the sugarcane sector, as world leaders that we are, what kind of changes do you see going on? And within 15 to 20 years' time, how important is it going to be, and how favorable to Brazil is this sector going to be, considering the low carbon economy? Welcome. You're on mute. Well, I'm never gonna learn. Thanks for having me, guys. Fernando, Marcelo, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'd like to use Cristiano's talk that gave the global definition of what we do, and I'll go straight to your question, Marcelo, on the sector. The sector had a privilege. In my opinion, this has been unbelievable so far. Since the Temer government created a national biofuel laws, it took 2 years. It's been 2 years. So it is an exception, actually. And after the creation of that, the sugarcane sector became an exception in the country from the standpoint of having a national law. And within that law, we are completely defined from the standpoint of the inclusion of the sustainability logics within the carbon issue. The law allowed, from an extremely positive way, as an important piece of information here, we had road shows in Asia. India has just announced on the Environment Day that they are going to promote change in the Brazilian model. So similar to what we do, I mean, which is spectacular, because we're talking about Asia as a model and opportunities that degenerates.
But what happens? The national law from 2017, which is being regulated only in 2019, is just being implemented in 2020, and it was a hit. It allows, let's say, stimulating two things. For example, one, trust, as the plans get developed, and they bring a very good perspective from the energy point of view. It promotes a very interesting standpoint for the producers and for the external market, as far as trustability is concerned, and the productive chain is also involved in this discussion. So what I want to say to you is that on COP26, there will be a stand in the fair, which is going to be showcasing a hybrid technology showing this type of insertion. And from the practical standpoint, Marcelo, the point of view and standpoint we had before, which was we'd have to be productive and we'd have to have quality and we'd need to have longevity to produce, it has impacted emissions, and this has impacted us. And I'm going to give you one example so that you can grasp the meaning of it. We have a product called vinhaça in Portuguese, which is acid and it's residual, and it cannot be dumped in rivers because it may kill life in the river. And it's made of potassium, and it's of utmost importance for the development of sugarcane. It used to be applied with no limit. This plantation of sugarcane would receive that, and that rest, that leftover, would be just left behind and out there. But with this product is now being applied on the line of the sugarcane along with the defensive productions in order to reduce the type of waste and emission. So it simulates productivity, and at the same time, with this example, it brings a competitive logic, and it stimulates the sector to transform this subproduct into a biogas. And with biogas, whether it's bioelectricity or any other form, the use of the biomethane is going to be used in replacement of the diesel. So I'm just showing you a direct consequence of this law, the creation of this law, so that you can understand. So the vision of this sector as far as maturity is concerned is the addition of all of the emissions and everything that you take as carbon to make a balance out of it. Some studies in Brazil and the US have concluded that the flexi car in Brazil emits less than the European car, a lot less. And what is the logic behind it as an evolution? With the Bolsonaro government, Ministro Bento has created this law and proposed this to build this at scale using hydrogen as the cell of production. We are talking about changing games and talking about the energy transition at the time we are living. Countries are trying to adjust their path as far as producing fuel is concerned, and we on this side are trying to improve all the things that we already have. We are looking into having 86 to 87% of cars that can use ethanol and gas in Brazil. This has changed when we started using the sugarcane and corn all together, producing 3.5 billion liters of ethanol. And they are going to be able to supply this deficit, and considering that we are producing less sugarcane. And this model is the consequence of this new law, and we hope that this happens in a much larger scale in Brazil in the future for everything that we need from the sustainability standpoint. The results are good and the perspectives are older for the private sector to walk hand in hand with the sustainability the way we want. The finance sector plays an important role in the process. We've seen a lot of new tools that are showing, because the private sector is looking into how to finance, and we look at new initiatives Carolina, what can you tell us about this? Do you also notice this interest and this new willing to engage from the private sector? Well, thank you, Fernando, for your invitation on behalf of Valor. Thank you, Marcelo, for the invitation, and thank you for the coalition. It's a pleasure to be here in the panel with you guys. So, just to answer your questions and to add up to what Caio said, we are living a very important moment in history. Moments that we are lacking resources and the territory of economy. The economy is about how we manage during scarcity. It brings a reflection on what new technologies are going to use what we have available as far as resources and technology available. And it's interesting because it's a standpoint that comes to what the countries are going to choose. I hear Caio saying on one side from the sugarcane industry, bringing a lot of positive points regarding the use of ethanol, the combustive cell in car production, and this experiment with biogas that can transform the fuel matrices in production lines. And on the other side, we see discussions in other countries that are consumers of hydrocarbons and fossil fuel. They are defending the green hydrogen, and it demands another type of technology, water electrolysis. If we had to choose a path like this, we'd have to install more than 5 gigawatts of power here in Brazil just to be able to meet the demand for this technology. So what we see in the next years is that many sectors are going to go looking into new technologies, and what are going to be the new technologies for this transition. Germany has just announced that they are going to invest in green hydrogen. They have started with 9 billion euros. And in Brazil, do we have another path to follow from the systemic standpoint in the world? For example, in Financial Times this morning, there was an article on the supply chain and what are the minerals that are going to be involved in the process. So it comes to add to your question, what are the initiatives for the private sector? The private sector alone cannot define what is going to be the path for the energy transition, but they can create conditions so that one part is going to be more important than the other, and the way they do things as far as the technologies are available. And from the sustainability standpoint, everything that is involved in the production chain. And talking about COP26, which is part of the focus of today's discussion, the role of G7 is important so that we can discuss the resilient chain, because it's going to be playing an important part in the transition of the low carbon production. So how can the private sector get into the conversation and with the finance sector as well? Up to 2030, Brazil can receive 1.3 trillion dollars for a green investment. I see the central bank accelerating the transparency of financial information, and it puts pressure on companies for this type of report, because they will demand from the banks that they disclose information on that, and the market capitals and CND3 claiming information in this regard. They're going to have a pressure on how to help the financial market so that they can have access to money that is advantageous. They say they call it the brown discount, and they need to consider that in this scheme of production. So what is going to happen further on? And you've said it right, it's not just about the carbon. when we talk about the potential and how the companies are manifesting the net zero intentions that they have, maybe it's something I can put as a criticism. A pledging net zero is not enough. You have to show how you're going to do this. It's not just about thinking of the carbon. You see Shell, for example, they were saying that they're going to compensate some of the 100,000 dozens tons of carbon. It's much higher than the numbers that are disclosed by other companies, of course, but it has to be realistic. So the Dutch court, they have demanded to decrease this number because it's looked really unrealistic. So we need to see that the net zero commitment demands actions and not material actions, and not on the 1-2 scope, which are the main influence, but also on scope number 3, which is the chain value. And a few companies look into it. Kai was talking about the renewable fuel. What metals are going to be needed? And we are probably going to need interventions and informations from these countries that do not really disclose information, and sometimes they have practices that shock with the information and practices that we have here. So what have we seen? Good cases that we've come across. There are some companies that are carrying out systemic work, not only directly, but also in their chain value. And they're not limiting this only to suppliers, but also to communities. We have to remember that we are in Brazil. And usually these chain values, they involve small and medium companies. They have a little way of tackling other sectors and community everything. So their roadmap is different. They have a long path to go through, and they're going to be inactive is going to be looked into, and it's not easy for them. It's not like working with gold, and still it's very hard. So what we've seen as far as good initiatives are concerned, and they count on this the finance sector, whether with green bonds emission or sustainability link, what we see is a work, but they need to have metrics. They have to be clear on how they're going to work with these social and green projects, and this is being demanded from the market. We need a second opinion sometimes. Environmental FIDICs, for example, if you follow the European way of operating it, they are going to look into environmental and social situations. So we need to train this chain value. We need to help them with resources, and then we can further give you more examples on that. In the agribusiness, we have 77% properties in the hands of small producers, and we know they have little access to technical personnel and little access to money.
So you would imagine that from the prospection standpoint, to have the IFC data, nearly the near trillions of dollars, it is a small compared to what we expect from the world, in the range of $23 trillion. So companies wouldn't take over a commitment only of their accountability when reporting information, but also working socially in their value chains. And the social work is critical. Before decarbonizing, you have to decouple. I mean, creating another logic of relationship with their supply chains and a systemic integrated outlook that's going to allow companies to deep dive on the biggest powers for decarbonization and energy transition, which is scope 3. So in general terms, I see great cases in Brazil of companies carefully analyzing this dimension and at the same time from the financial market, availability of resources. Some companies have benefited from that for that kind of investment. Great. Thank you, Carolina. We have another Safra plan that was announced and will be enforced on July 1st. This Safra plan reinforces lines related to sustainability, like the ABC program, for instance. But one of the complaints was also the lack of or few resources that will be destined to technical assistance for family agriculture, which is what we're talking about, including other things, to see how important it is to have technical assistance in the field, especially for small producers. So Marcelo, back to you. Well, things are complicated now, huh? You guys gave me a tip and a cue to talk to you. So JBS, Brazilian's top company in the food sector. It is a global company. So we could ask you not only about your action, a Brazilian company in the climate action, but a world company in the climate action. What is JBS's standpoint and actions? But I have to give you just one more piece of opinion here. And as you always say, the greatest challenge is in the scope 3 that Carolina has just discussed. So how does JBS, not only is it getting ready for the world climate movement, how do you plan to engage suppliers in this agenda? Let's remember that over 70% of Brazilian properties have 1 to 50 hectares, and the whole group accounts for less than 30% of the production's gross value. So there's a challenge, but also an opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to reinvent this Brazilian agribusiness sector. So how do you see that? Welcome. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Fernando. It is a pleasure to have all the other co-workers here, in other fellows in this important climate change issue, how we're going to face that challenge of a transition into a green economy. JBS is a global company. As Fernando said, we are the world's top protein company, which brings huge responsibility, as big as our size, because we are operating in 13 countries. So the first thing we did was to build internal engagement, actually. Our purpose is to feed the world. We are in the food business, which is so noble. The world's population grows. The planet can feed this growing population, but if nothing is done, the planet can lose this capacity to feed the population that grows. By 2050, we're going to have 2 more billion people. So we've come to a decision that sustainability is our strategy, because our core is biogenesis. So sustainability has become the lenses through which we look at every single aspect of the company, every single decision we make. And it's got to be part of the culture, because will you imagine how many decisions are taken in a company? Like every single company, regardless of the size, how many decisions are made, how many people are making decisions. And if you don't have this culture, this clarity that sustainability is what we have to seek, is what we have to do, in every single decision, we won't be able to reach a global target. And the goal has got to be 2050 or 2040. Well, Paris is 2050, but if you analyze the information that science brings up, it is so robust. There's such a robust correlation between carbon emission and increased temperature, how this is going to affect the rain regime, food producing capacity. It's got to be urgent. It's got to be soon. So let's do this for 2040, which has brought a huge challenge. How are we going to do this? So first, we submitted our target to our goal to SBTI, the science-based target, because without it, we were unable to build a way to, we cannot contribute. If you say net zero by 2040, it means we're going to neutralize our emissions globally. Okay, if there's a waste up until then, we're going to compensate that. But the goal, the target is to seek neutralization. So the first point is to submit every single unfolding has a baseline that is based on a scientific proven system that brings a total transparency of its evolution throughout time regarding the clarity and allows for each single region, each single unit globally to compare to each other. And we have invested $1 billion additionally for CAPEX in this decade to transition and to allow us to reduce the residues can be more efficient and productive. And we're going to foster circular industry. I mean, we use natural resources. Last year, we used 50% of the residues, 1 million tons, and we created a circular economy, an industry around our industry that reuses the residues we produce. We have great examples if we have time to discuss that, which increases the company's competitiveness. So this was huge internal work. And as you said, Marcelo, 95% of our challenge is based on scope 3. So we have a pretty vast chain. And the first thing we got to do is to ensure that our zero deforestation policy is complied with. It's been 10 years now. But using Brazil's example, we have a chain that is not integrated. So we have the suppliers of our suppliers. We control our suppliers. We control an area which is bigger than a country as big as Germany. And we were able to find a technology, to develop technology, the blockchain technology that allows us to go beyond, which is to monitor our suppliers. And then back to your question, how can we do that? There are small producers, big producers. So it's useless to say, well, if you don't do that, you're out. It is not an exclusion process, because if you exclude, people have to produce. We cannot exclude them. We have to help them join the new system and different chain, a huge chain. So let's create conditions. So let's use the word legalize. This is not the right word, but so everyone fits the transparent bakery here. So livestock. We created 3 green offices which focus on fostering the adaptation. Because when we get to 2025, this is going to be compulsory. Everyone is going to be within the chain. But by then, we're going to encourage, foster, support. As Carolina said, we need money to transition. We know that there's much to do. We can do that. There are nature-based solutions which are extraordinary. With degraded areas, you can have a consortium of production of livestock, agriculture, reforestation. We have space left to reforest and produce 40% more food. So there are solutions, but in addition, other initiatives, other technologies will come. We're also including $100 million to support innovation in this chain. That is, it's natural solutions based strategies to bring new things so we can help our suppliers so they can fit, so they can be more productive, and they improve socially. If you allow me, Marcelo, let me build on Carolina's talk. We are on the threshold of a green revolution. I don't know how many billions we're going to have in terms of investment. I'm sure there will be more, because the transformation is going to be greater than the industrial revolution in the past. So it is a huge transformation. In every big revolution, people are left behind. And the small ones, the ones that have less conditions to follow. So we created the Amazon Fund, JBS, for the Amazon that has the goal to support small producers that are not in our chain. Because you can't be successful if your surroundings isn't successful. So let's make an effort. Let's support small producers. We have released 6 wonderful projects. If you have time to discuss, it's gonna be great. I don't want to talk too much, but I'm so enthusiastic about it. Every single investment we make will increase companies' competitiveness. Company will be more competitive. Brazil will be more competitive. We will have more equity, more equality, and we will have more sustainability as well. Fernando, back to you. I'd like to bring Cristiano to this discussion. The importance of companies and even of support to small producers, especially. And within this aspect, Cristiano, I'd like to know your opinion on the remuneration of small producers for environmental services, for instance. What is your opinion about that? Should producers be paid? Is this nothing but an obligation? This is a broad topic, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thank you, Fernando. And it's great to hear Tomazoni talking. It feels like standing up and pursuing your actions is really exciting. I mean, Klabin's experience with a small producer has started with the FSC culture. That was the way for us to learn how to deal with small producers, like in the forest. We committed to certify all of our partners. Carolina has talked about this as well. You can't do this on your own. You got to work together. We also use the EcoVax platform in order to create protocols. So we can't be far from the core issue, which is a private company seeking to support civil society and governments. So with governance, we don't run away from platforms. We don't run away from the scientific stiffness. We can't run away from protocols and rules that will tell us how to deal with each issue. So certifying a small producer, in our case, a forest producer, this is the only way to go. So they do have to be paid by environmental services. This topic can be discussed, and we have to discuss this topic. The southern hemisphere, especially Latin America, and more specifically Brazil, is actually a region that preserved its forests.
The debate here is not geopolitical, it is factual. And the forest is more preserved than forests in all the country. And I am talking about only the private society and small producers and medium producers. They are the ones who have learned through empirical learning with family history, for example. We have learned from them that water springs, they have to be preserved. Leave a tree by that spring, promoting shading for that water, for example. Then the empirical knowledge from these people needs to be translated into science and needs to be paid for. It's just the same way the carbon credit certification has become a product, and more it is going to be remaining as a product. This is also a product, and this has to be paid for. And the initiative has to be from the private sector. They know that this has to be done, and it's not a resource that's going to be endless. We need to pay for that, and it's important for the maintenance of the social, for the sustainability actions. I'd like to know also if in the financially sustainable models, if we have any cases that look into this type of financing. And considering this, what are the main difficulties that we can find on the way? What can we do to overcome such difficulties and make this market really grow? I think it's important. So you have an important question. Cristiano really understood why this service has to receive recognition. I think the most important thing is how to create a market for this. We are tired of seeing all over the world examples of companies that create separate funds to pay for this additional service for this producer. And sometimes they change the strategic view, and then the producer uses this money and deforests and does things that are not adherent to the original plan. So what we've seen and that is working, and sometimes within some global labs that we work with, plans that involve companies and work with off-taking. They ensure the purchase to materialize this trust relationship, this long-term trust relationship with the supply chain. It's not just about paying for environmental services, but Tomazoni and Cristiano said we need to train these producers. It's not trivial. It's not just about accessing capital. Fernando said it very well at the beginning. We still have a challenge to join the finance sector with sustainable practices, and we have a lot to advance in this theme. And based on our experience, the companies that are showing success are the ones who have a very complete economic model. We establish KPIs in the supply chain, and then I stretch my contract so that I can have a purchasing relationship that works long term. And I invest in technical assistance, and then I create an incentive so that the producer can see uh, preserving the environment. So this long-term way of looking is of utmost importance so that the measurements are not just scattered out there, and so that this plan doesn't change directions on the way. It's important to say that we have very important partners in this agenda, and they are multilateral. We see, for example, a movement of partners of partners of this nature. They are helping this initiative, this type of with this type of mentality, and they're helping to increase the use of resources this way. You have to have a process because the money has to come in capitalistically, and then in time this economy is going to be self-sustainable, and they are important players. They need to be considered, but they demand a lot. When you attract a player like this, they want to know the metrics. They want it to be reportable, measurable, verifiable, and they demand that that everyone that is involved has political risk policies in place. And it's not just about financing the project, but it's about involving the people who are in the project. And then we have a very good opportunity with this. The Convergences report has established more than $200 billion available for this type of initiative. And many of them were aimed at health, education, and mitigation of climate risk. So we have a very good opportunity with partnership with these companies. But if we do not have an economic model that is developed and at the same time decreases the cost of changing the small producers and generate finance incentives, that the actions will have the tendency of, well, ending up reducing its efficacy as we have more macroeconomical pressures, for example, deforesting and increasing production. We have to look at this very systemically. I'd say we have a very big challenge because the succeeding companies trying to get a plan together that involves the supply chain with success. So before I get Marcelo talking again, and I will excuse that we are already receiving a lot of questions from the audience, and there is one question from Roberto Branco that adds to what you were saying. He is asking, how far the creation of condominiums of small producers, and I go beyond that, cooperatives, for example, how far this union of producers can facilitate, how can they facilitate in the process? So I thank you very much, because the cooperativism will end and agri-industry models. So developing these supply chain models is hard when you have pulverized producers. It's hard to exercise the power in these situations. Let's talk about the Amazon, for example. If you want to work the thesis of the standing forests, if you compare the Amazon and in comparison to other countries, other parts of the world, we supply 0.2% of all we can produce with the Amazon. So we have a market of around $220 billion dollars of products that come from the forest and its biodiversity. There is not this one single company that is able to work with their supply chain and ensure this incentive, because in general, the purchasing is smaller, the chain is more pulverized, and the role of the cooperatives can bring many companies together, and you have a lot of companies that are going to benefit from the same supply chain. So the capital market can be a very good partner in this type of arrangement, trying to create fund mechanisms through cooperatives, and they can associate credits with sustainable producers indicators. And obviously this needs to be competitive, because with the Safra plan and the rural credit, the abundant capital is not necessarily in consonant with all the other operations and plans. So we need to have an important participation, access to capital with sustainable practices and cooperatives. Cooperatives are going to be very good partners in the production and in the education and the increasing of this production for the companies that are part of this chain. So Carolina, thank you. Marcelo? Marcelo, I think your microphone is on mute. I apologize. Carolina brought something that I like very much. ESG is the nutritional fact table of the suppliers. And most recently, you reminded me of one lecture of Henry Lawrence, in which he said something about the change in relationship between the client and the investor. And so it was something like, when you lose clients, you're already losing your investors. It was something like that, something you've mentioned before. I think it was this. So within this model, the investors, it gets a lot of relevance. In search of this model with investment balance, with actions that mitigate the climate situation, I'd like you to talk about the relationship of the private sector in the definition of governmental values, for example, Plano Safra, or the designation of funds, just the FNO, the North Fund, because in the last 10 years, it has given 10 billion reais to livestock farming, and $300 million to anything related to forest. We're talking about balance, but there is no balance within uh, a macro development in Brazil. If we get together, for example, the eye of the investor, the eye of the client, and the need for a more balanced development of a green develop that is balanced. How do you see this as industry within a few years? Well, your microphone is on mute, and I think we're going to lead this. I apologize, everyone. I was thinking about what Gilberto and Carolina were saying about two things just before I answer your questions. Two things that I heard here. Gilberto analyzed the company and the will he has to go after results and considering everything and everyone that has to be involved. And I think Fernando probably felt the same thing. It just shows how complex it is to have a very global mechanism that covers this all with all the specifications that are required. But I'd like to tell you an important and interesting story regarding cooperativism in Brazil. It is fantastic. Cooperativism has reached such level at the financial sector, and it does spectacular things. Let me tell you, the law of Renovable defines that the mandatory part has to define their metrics, their goals, and it involves the whole purchase mandatorily, and it involves all the goals from the government and the MPs. So what happens is that the usings are working at 80% and they're certifying, but their suppliers are on the way of their development. What happens to the sugarcane industry? How can we accelerate this with them? Well, we can do that with cooperatives. Let me just tell you something here. There is a company in Rio Grande do Sul state. They have a system. They can implement financial systems, certifying their own suppliers and getting involved with the CBUs. It's not something that the legislation can hold behind. It has to be intelligent so that everything can happen at larger scales. So it's just something that I'd like to comment about before I answer your question. So Marcelo, I just remembered this Andrew Lawrence's discussion because he was asked during the debate. A Brazilian person was asking this. It was an international meeting, and then the Brazilian said, "Well, you haven't said much about ethanol." And then he said,
We need to offer the necessary volumes, but much more than that, I need that the costs drop every year, and it should drop a lot because competition of energy in this transition is a terrible competition. If you see the energies that wouldn't be competitive back then, they are in the regular price range of energy, electric energy. So this is something that we ask ourselves: how can the smaller producers have a investment pace to reduce costs based on Safra plan? I've coexisted with Safra plan for 30 years. There's never been sugar in the Safra plan. It was always after the year was ending. And so I'm being honest here. So this is because the truthfulness of the real world, what works in the real world, is the structures that are built and have legitimacy. This is what we have to try and do. And when it comes to cooperativism in Brazil, it is tested and proven. Take a look at the LPF. You see a cooperative as Cocamar in northern western of the state of Paraná. It has a volume of LPFs which is extraordinary. with fantastic results. And they've been doing this with sugarcane too in Paraná and in São Paulo. So that's what I believe in. Just to continue with Marcelo's talk, this transition, Marcelo, that Carolina was talking about, I'd like to make a comment on that. Because everything is on a short term, like long term is real complex. I mean, medium term. Long term is complex. Every 60 years, a new energy, like coal reached 50 to 60% of the market, as Bill Gates said. And then oil can do that 30 something percent, and then there's natural gas 20%, and then there's our turn with renewable energy. How is this transition going to be? How fast is it going to be? And how much can we do actually? So that's the question I ask Marcelo. How is this sector going to get ready for that? And the perspective view of it, I cannot see a way other than technological disruption, because innovation is so fast. Like Raisin has just initiated a new plant for second generation ethanol. And I've been talking a lot to people from other companies out of Brazil that want to invest here, that you see Brazil as a standard. So in my opinion, Marcelo, I see that we will not play the game unless we have small producers well established around cooperatives or systems that work, and they're similar to that mechanism with smart financial support, where multinationals and critical inputs for technological development and productivity are part of the process. Otherwise, clients will turn their back to us. Fernando, over to you. Thank you, Marcelo. Tomazoni, I see him on my screen. Tomazoni is changing his position in his chair. He wants to comment what others have commented already. But of course, I'll open your space for you to do that. But I have another question from your standpoint, from the company's standpoint. Of course, this goes for the Cristiano later, but from the company's standpoint, do we have financial tools available, streamlined ones, so we can put those projects into practice? This is one point. Second point, from a technological standpoint, we know there are plenty of solutions that are coming out for several agriculture, livestock businesses. So how far ahead are these technologies in terms of helping companies and production chains to comply with their sustainable goals? Thirdly, of course, you've mentioned this recently. That doesn't mean, Tomazoni, that companies are going to increase their expenses. This can even make companies more competitive. So I want to hear your thoughts and also hear your considerations on what has been said. Well, talked about three factors. Will you repeat those, please? Finance system, if we have tools, simple tools, streamlined tools to allow for that financing, importance of technologies that are appearing for the control of production chains and difficult chains as JBS's chain. Is that investment or is that an expense? Can companies improve their competitiveness? Well, I was moving here, but not because I wanted to comment. I was just agreeing with what people were saying, actually. When we have this talk, there's so much being done and so many initiatives that are working well. We have to expedite technologies that already exist. I agree with Caio and Carolina. We are going to require disruptive solutions because there's not a one size fits all solution. If we do this with the current technology, we won't get there, or it's going to be so expensive. The things are not going to be accessible, and we have to do this making products more accessible. We have to make products cheaper, because if it's harder for us, if it's harder to have people access products in our sector, like people struggle to access food. In spite of the whole food production in the world, people don't eat enough. So improving accessibility to food has to be part of the strategy. You don't have to be only carbon neutral, but have to deliver a more accessible and more sustainable product. That's the biggest challenge. And then technologies will have to support us so we can do that, because probably we won't find solutions in the current technologies. But I'd also like to comment on the cooperatives. I have a super positive experience when it comes to the Amazon Fund. We are supporting 3 value chains there. I said outside of our chain, not directly our chain. It is a social support, except for the separated from the big producers. This is not a company. They are not part of the biggest chain that has access to credit and technical assistance, and they have educational support, and they are somewhat forgotten throughout time. And as Teixeira said a while ago, the issue of environmental services, I mean, this is all interconnected, but we chose 3 chains, one from the Acai, and which has connections and links with Amazon Bay, and they train people and had the opportunity to understand how challenging it is to train the corporate spirit. But that's the only way for you to bring value to small producers. Otherwise, they have no value whatsoever. They work and work and work, and the value is sprayed across the chain. So this educational point and financial support as well, so you can build infrastructure for them to add value. This is critical. So to my mind, today, the credit that they have, we can discuss if credit is enough or not. I'll leave it to those that are more knowledgeable, maybe Caio, Marcelo, they're more experienced in this sense. But they have credit, but the credit doesn't get to them because they're not ready to access the credit. So one of the projects we have in the Amazon is to support institutions that streamline this process so the credit reaches people that need it, because most of the growth of available credit isn't used today because we're short of projects. There's a bureaucracy. There's this whole process. There's going to be compliance throughout the process. So one of the things we're supporting is having the credit before they ask for more credit. We want the existing credit to reach those that need it. And another point is, this is within the JBS fund for the Amazon, that we would support disruptive innovations on this path. So startup accelerators, we are supporting startup accelerators to bring this creativeness, this innovation within. Because will you imagine in the Amazon how many new molecules can the Amazon serve and feed the world with molecules we don't know so far? And additionally, we had an agreement with Embrapa because, in my opinion, science is gonna solve that. Embrapa has I don't know how many labs, over 12 labs in the region. We're running a project. We try to bring this biotechnology within the process. So there's much to be created, Fernando. Answering your technological question, private companies have to support the government, institutions, every institution we need to support, and they'll have to form partnerships. The Acai project in the Amazon, the projects we have with Solidariedade, they will benefit 1,500 families, and it's going to nearly double the income of those families. They're going to use livestock, agriculture, they're going to capture carbon Carolina, we're going to have these small producers sell the carbon credit and monetize the work they're doing so they have an additional income with that. Anyways, what I have to say is nothing that we were doing, I consider this to be an expense. Another question there. I clearly believe that we are investing in the increased productiveness because if you don't reduce costs, that's going to increase the value of the product. Another point is the consumer here, which is the most important part of the whole chain, which is the person that will value things. So, with awareness, education, as things progress, you either reduce the total cost of our system or you increase the value of our products. So, you are more competitive and you are more sustainable, you're more inclusive. And this is all a win win game. There's no such thing as a loser in this process. Thanks, Tomazoni. I'd like to bring Cristiano to this discussion. Let me hear what you have to say on this initiative, private initiative role, and your opinion on the finance market, technology, competitiveness. I also want to hear your thoughts on international forums. There are plenty of them that you join. What about the image? What is being done in Brazil? What kind of expectations do you catch from foreigners regarding what we're doing here? Perfect, Fernando. Well, first off, just to follow your question, I mean, access to financing, big companies do have access to financing, undoubtedly. Medium companies are still far behind. I see the banks are making resources available. So we'll be hearing from medium companies. Cooperatives play an important role, as you said. This is very important. But I'd like to make a link between cooperatives and finance access, and to talk about the outskirts of Brazil, but not only Brazil, but of the Cerrado and all those that have access to. They don't have access to anything, and they need government. They need organizations from the civil society. They need empowered city halls for projects. So there's an outskirt in the world, in a Brazilian outskirt, that is out of the game. They have no access to resources and to funds, and not to mention other social issues. A few billion people that are out of the game. And, the math doesn't add up. We have to talk about changing behavior, changing consumption. We're talking about a lot of waste in the world, in big world capitals, and so on and so forth. There is a whole new world debate and a new reflection all over the world. So, not to go off the rails so much, this is something I'd like to comment.
How Klabin works, and I'm not talking just about my company, but I think it brings context. We all emit greenhouse gases. So we are here as very good citizens, and we will have to try to mitigate. If I looked at my own situation only, I can say Klabin is positive. What I get from what I sequestrate, what I capture of CO2, when subtracted from all I emit of greenhouse emissions in my industrial operations, um, I end up with a positive number. Uh, I could be selling my exceeding carbon, my exceeding emissions. So I think it's sort of selfish for for the planet. In opposition to that, We are protagonists in the theme, and we believe in mitigation. We have a very good country. We have our forest, but above all, we need to reduce our emissions, and it is crucial. And some other thing I have to say, Fernando, we cannot refrain from mentioning this. I like what Carolina said today regarding energy, but I'd like to bring a provocation because it still does not add up. The Northern Hemisphere. If we just project what is used as far as natural gas and coal and fuel oil, and then we consider the part of the world that's not included in this conversation, it doesn't add up. So energy, and I think you will be able to have another live event on this, but as far as energy is concerned, things do not add up yet. Okay, thank you very much, Marcelo. Thank you, Fernando. As we are heading towards the end of the conversation today, I have a question that is addressed to everyone. I'd like, if possible, if you can answer the question in 3 minutes. We were talking about the private sector, and now there is no private scenario without the participation of the public power. We also know of the image of Brazil overseas, and it's jeopardizing many things now. I am not talking about government actions. I'm talking about state action. It's the 9th year that deforestation is increased in a row, and now we have an increase in fire. The Amazon puts us in the world, but the Amazon is now taking us out of the world. So as long as we have land grabbing actions at this current scale, we are contributing to climate change, and this can be very devastating for the use of land in Brazil, for the agribusiness in Brazil, and this is the focus of the coalition Brazil. So the question is the following: what is lacking for the private sector? I'm not asking the government. What is lacking the private sector until they can come public and use this convincing power that they have to finally tackle this question of deforestation in Brazil? If 90% reduction happened in Indonesia, what is lacking Brazil? And using the words of Cândido Bracha, if we can finally in the future talk about deforestation the same way we used to talk about inflation. 3 minutes each. I'd like everyone to answer this question. Thank you. Carolina? Wow, such a responsibility, Marcelo. Well, considering you only have 3 minutes, I'm going to use one word that's going to add to this equation. Let's try to give proper credit to those who do things right. Let's talk about supervision. We have the environmental code, but we don't have the execution. Brazil is better at doing things. We need to work on the rural enrollment, and it's important to give proper credit to those who are doing the right things. We have protagonizing companies, but they still have trouble with credit access, for example. And then, well, Gilberto said, we have offices all over. Look at this investment. We need to understand that those companies who are managing to do things systemically, they need to have the advantage. They have this advantage, but we need the government to finally execute. So it's about punishing, about supervising, and this is going to bring effect to financing. So the government they have to do their own part. And as I said at the beginning, we have to have this clear. what is this? What is our direction as far as the transition is concerned? We are talking about the low carbon policy. This is not clear for Brazil, not yet. So who is next? Oh, Caio, what do you think? Okay. Okay, Caio, your mic is off again. Yeah. Oh, it was just a way of keeping myself quiet. Okay. No, Carolina, I'd like to make a comment. And I think Marcelo is going to remember this 2 years ago at a BARB conference, the first one with Marcelo as president. It was clearly said that we do not get anything for Amazon if the private sector is not active part of the process. So the evolution was relatively minimum, not to say close to zero. And what we see was a partition, a division. That was difficult because we saw people thinking that it was a part that the government had to play only alone, when we don't even have sometimes the government doesn't even have a vehicle to supervise how things are going. So we need to change the model as a whole. First of all, we need to see, and the government has to see, that they have to be humble enough to admit that they don't know how to do it. And also, the private sector needs to create a proposal with the government in order to tackle and address this problem. Our image is only getting worse. That's one thing for sure. Okay, now Tomazoni, right? Okay. Okay, what I think that this is a challenge, as I said at the beginning, that has to be resolved and tackled by the society as a whole, not just the government or the private sector or the third sector. It is important because we all have responsibilities. I am going to stick to one thing first. At home, we have one work to do. We have to ensure that our value chain does not include deforestation. And as I said at the beginning, we had a challenge to overcome, which is not having public information enough to trace this chain because it is fragmented. We have built a blockchain technology, and now we are engaging voluntarily our suppliers so that they can provide data from their own suppliers in a way that if you're not in agreement with car because you probably had some deforestation, so that they can be included. So this way we are going to create a positive wave so that all of the suppliers that we have, more than 60,000 agribusiness suppliers, can be included. I see very positively that PAR, which has been just announced, it's a digital way of accelerating this process. But if you are committed to this regularization, it can be monitored, and this can be done. So the government has an important role to play in making this process happen. We've been working very hard with all these institutions and entities of class and unions, and this is a way for us to representatively organize everything for it all to work. Okay, many good things have been said. I will try to just add up to what you said. I agree to most things that have been said. I like what Caio said, that the government has to be humble to say that they need help. But I'm just going to show you one example, just to brighten up this a little bit. In mid-90s, I was in Japan learning, among other things, about recycling. I'm talking about 1994 or 95. And then there I saw that recycling was something that was taught at school. Well, today, at least in the private sector, private schools, my kids are learning about this at school. The public schools also need to consider that sustainability is there. It is a subject that is covered by most part of society, but we need more. We need to charge the government on this. And as Gilberto said, saying and demanding, just as Carolina said, that legality is put in place is a work that we have to do. But let's look at it optimistically. Okay, Fernando, thank you. Well, Marcelo, it was a pleasure to mediate this event with you. I'd like to hear your final considerations. Fernando, I think all the colleagues that are here with us today, and this is the essence of the coalition, discussing the questions of land in Brazil in an amicable way, a responsible discussion without running away from the challenge. And around the table, I'd say is the best place for us to discuss Brazil and not exchanging insults online. Those who are left behind on the way can always come back, because this is a house that has its door always open, because we are discussing what is best for our country, which is our country and its people. So I thank everyone for making use of your time, and I thank you, Valor, for the partnership. So thank you, Fernando, for the partnership. Okay, thank you, Marcelo, Gilberto Mazzoni, Carolina, Caio, Fernando, everyone. It was a very fruitful debate. When it's fast, it means it was good. I think time flew. So somehow I hope we have managed to contribute to this debate, which is so important and can define the future of the role of our country in the world. So thank you very much. So we are closing the third live of the series. We are going to have 3 on this theme. We are looking ahead for COP26, and we have discussed a lot the private sector role on this with people who are very important in this process. As a reminder, at the end of this 6 lives, we are going to have an additional section that is going to complete everything that was discussed, along with coalition, Brazil, and agriculture discussions. We are now closing this live, and the sequence live is sponsored by JPS, and the program Net Zero 2040. We also had sponsorship from Nescafé and MRV, and I thank you very much for everyone who managed to contribute. I wish you all a very pleasant week.